Hey friends, what's up? Today we're going to learn how to make a Svelte GUI. You might be familiar with WeakPaint, which is really this awesome tool that gives you these controls that you can plug into anything, so when you change the value, it's going to be reflected real time. And basically that's the idea behind this. If I update this text, it's going to get updated, and I can also update other values. And we're going to see how much simpler this is in Svelte using Svelte's declarative nature and reactivity. So I can update the X position if I want, I can update the Y position, I can update the radius, and I also have mouse wheel scrolling, so it's easier to update the values. We can change the color of the circle itself, of the stroke. We can change the stroke size like this, so we can go to something extreme like 40, for example, and then you can use this for whatever you want. Maybe using Free.js is not important, learning about SVGs, so you can learn this way, for example, how animating SVG line works. So we can see what actually happens when we use the dash array offset property in SVGs. So you can see the space increases, and this already looks beautiful, like the land of the rising sun, right? So you can already see how these things work, right? So you can see what happens. And for example, if we put in dash to the maximum length of the SVG, and if we crank up the offset to 1, now you start to realize, okay, this is how this works. You can read an article, but by the time you try it out in your editor, CodePen, whatever, you refresh it, and then you already lose the context, right? And then we can see, okay, maybe we can animate this using keyframes. You can go from 1 to 0, right? And this already looks like a bunch of other things. You can animate paths, you can make this a loading spinner, right? And this starts to get your mind racing with ideas, right? We can maybe make something more interesting like this if I play around with the offset. And it's really also simple in code. So let me show you. So basically we define this object here, which is going to be a Svelte store, and I want to do the minimum work possible. I don't want to have to specify what type this is. If this sees that this is a number, it probably is a number input, right? If it sees that a color starts with hash, then it knows that probably this is a color input. And same for a range input. If it sees an object that it has a value inside, then this is probably a range input. And then we just instantiate this component right here, and then we can just use the store as is. As you can see, we didn't have to make 100 inputs and etc. bindings, and we can focus on things that are more important. So how tedious is this, right? If we say type, now we have to say if we want range, for example, and then we have to say min, let's say 0. So what is the value that I had here? It's 200. We can say, okay, we can say 1000 for some reason, and then we can say step 0.1. And now we can also bind this to some other value. We can say bind value, we can bind it to X, and then we can also do the same for Y. And now, okay, this isn't that bad, but it's like really tedious. Yeah, we can do it like this. Let me just set this to 200. And if I go here, instead of using the store, I'm just going to remove this. So for the X and Y position, I'm going to use this. All right, so now we go back here and you're like, okay, let me just play around with this. And this works fine, right? But the problem is now you don't know what these labels are. So you're like, okay, let me just go back. Maybe I'm going to add a label or whatever. Even if you're lazy, this takes some time, right? So we can do this. We can say X. And then we can also add a label here. And this is really tedious already. And even if I save this and go back, now I know what the values are, but I had to do all of that. It looks ugly. It takes space, right? Not only clutters your editor, but it clutters your mind because you have to deal with this. But you don't have to do this, right? Because you're going to make a Svelte GUI, and this is the problem we're going to solve. And basically that's it. So now we can also revert this. We can just say GUI, and then we can use the value that's returned. Do that, and basically that's it. How beautiful is this, friends? Alright, but before I get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Alright friends, as you can see, we're starting from scratch. So let me just explain the thought process, because I think that's more important than any code that you can write. So when I approach something like this, I'm like thinking, okay, what would be the ideal API that I want to use? As I said, I want to do the minimal possible amount of work. So this really isn't important what it's named. You can name it GUI, whatever. So this is an object. Then you can say the X position and Y position is 200. And then thinking, okay, this is really great, but this isn't really reactive, right? So how can we make something reactive across components, across JavaScript files in Svelte? Well, we can use Svelte stores, of course. And if you don't know what Svelte stores are, I have an entire video on Svelte stores you can check out. So I'm thinking maybe we can say import writable from Svelte store. And then since this is a writable, we have to pass this like this. So we can pass an object to a writable. And this is really great. We have to structure it like this. And this works really great, but I don't want the user to know about Svelte stores if someone is using this. This is really not a great user experience, right? So we can just tuck away the store in another file. So I'm going to open the sidebar, and if I didn't mention it already, I'm just using a regular SvelteKit project, but you can just initialize a Svelte project with Vite or use SvelteKit if you want. It's not important. Beside of a source, here we have this library folder. I'm going to create a GUI folder. So I'm going to say new file. So I'm going to use this trick in VS Code. I'm going to name the folder GUI, and then I'm going to create a GUI.svelte component anyhow. And then I'm also going to create a store, TS. Of course, TypeScript is optional. You don't have to use TypeScript if you don't want. And then I'm also going to create what's also named a barrel file, so we can export everything at once and we can import things using a single line import, right? And basically that's it. We don't have to do anything else. And then inside of our store file, we're just going to do the same thing. I'm going to say import writable from Svelte store, and then I can export a function which I can name GUI controls like this, and we can pass in values which can be any, because we don't really know about any of these values, right? So some people are going to say, haha, using TypeScript, using any. Well, in this case, we actually have no idea. The user can pass anything. It's going to be up to this code to determine what this is. Of course, you can be more safer. You can say unknown and etc. You can make more checks, but any is perfectly fine in this case. So this is values. My bad. So we can also return a writable. That's basically what this is. We can return writable values, and we just made a nice snug wrapper, so the user doesn't have to care about this stupid implementation, right? Who cares about what they're using, store signals and etc. I just want this to work. And then we can use our barrel file, so we can import the component itself. So we can name this whatever GUI from GUI.svelte, and then we can also import the store from store. That's basically it. So now we can export GUI and GUI controls. That's basically it, friends. So we can go here, and then instead of writable, let's see if we get auto imports working. If the gods are merciful, praise be. So now we get controls, which is really awesome. Now we can remove this, and let's see. Now we also have to use our component. So our component is basically only in charge of rendering the UI. That's basically what it does. So we're going to have this GUI component, and this component is going to accept a Svelte store. That's basically it. And we can name this prop whatever you want, store or whatever. And then we can pass it the configuration object or whatever, but I'm just going to name it controls. And that's basically it. And of course, if we save it, nothing's going to happen because we haven't implemented it yet. Also, don't forget to import GUI here. So you can go at the top, import GUI, and that's it. So now we can go to our GUI component. We can create a script tag, and we can declare a prop, export let, controls. So now if we say, for example, hi, we're going to see our component works as expected. All right, so let's first see what even is control. So I'm going to use a console log. I'm going to put in the controls here. Let's open the developer tools, and you're going to see we're going to get this object, which is basically just an empty object. And what it is, well, basically this is a store. So we have to subscribe to the store, which we do using the $sign. So this is really just syntactic sugar. We can just save this, and now we're going to get access to our store, and we're going to see we get the values X and Y. Alright, so what do we want to do? Well, basically, I want to somehow loop over all of these values, and then I want to say, okay, if this is a number, then I want to create a number input and etc. So how can we do this? Well, to loop over object entries, we can use object.entries. So we can do something like this. We can say controls and pass it to object entries. So now we're going to get two useful things. If I didn't already mention it, here is how I want this to work. The key that you pass in is going to be a label. So even if you name this banana or whatever, the label that is going to use is going to be banana, and then you can pass any value you want. And that's why I'm going to use entries, because you can use other things like object keys, but I'm going to show you why I'm going to use entries. So object entries, we subscribe to the store. Perfect. So let's go here, and you can already see it returns an array. So this is how this looks like. So we can loop over this, and then we can just destructure these two values and give it any name we want, because when you destructure an array, that's how it works. So we can name this first value whatever. It can be banana, right, as I said, but we're going to name this label, and this is going to be value. So that's how that's going to work. All right, so if we go to our code here, let's just assign this to entries. I'm going to remove this console log. We're going to name this const entries, and we're going to say the type is any because it's any, right? We don't know what the user is going to pass. Another thing, we don't want to create the panel or get an error if nothing is passed, right? So let's check if it's empty, right? So we can say const is not empty, and then we can say entries length if it's higher than 0, right? And that's basically it. So now we can just create a loop. I have this handy snippet, so I can say if is not empty, then we can do whatever we need to do. And I'm going to create this class GUI. So inside of here, just to make space. So remember how I said that you're going to loop over this. Just do that. So I can go over here, again, snippet. I can create an each loop. So I can loop over the entries. So remember, the entries is an array, so we can use array destructuring. Of course, we can say entry and then do this, or we can pass it 1 for the other value, but we can just use array destructuring. We can name this whatever we want. So we want to take the label and we want to take the value. All right, cool. So now we just need to do a bunch of checks, and that's how simple this is. So we can again use a snippet. We can say if, and now we can say type of value is a number. That's how we know that it's a number. And now we can also create again what we did before. We can just use the label, and then we can create the input. So this is going to be input of type number. And we can also pass it here the same value that was passed in, but if for whatever reason you want this to be reactive, we can just use the store itself. So here's how we would do it. We would just say value equals, and then you can just use the store. Controls, and you pass it the label, which is going to act as the key, right? So here is something else that I'm going to do. So to know what to update in the store, when you write the function, I'm just going to pass a data attribute, so I don't have to pass it to the event listener, which I'm going to show you in a second. So I can say data key, and I can just pluck this value from this element. Simple as that. I can say the key is this, and now here is the most important part. We really can't use any value like bind and etc. We really have to use regular JavaScript and event listeners. When a value changes, then we just update the store, and the store is going to update the value everywhere else. And basically that's how that works. So we can say on change, for example, and then we're going to create a function update controls, and that's basically it. And if the user uses a mouse, we can also say on wheel, which is another event listener, and we can also say update controls. And let's just create this function here. So it's going to be function update controls. We're going to pass in an event, which is going to be type of event, and that's basically it. We don't really have to do anything else right now. As you can see, it's not that complicated. One thing I want to improve is this checking, though. I don't want to do type of value and etc. equal numbers. I just want something else to take care of this for us, so we can create an object and we can put functions inside that can do the validation for us. So how can we do that? Well, this is a really cool thing that you can do. So you can give it any name, right? And I'm just going to name it is, and I'm going to pass in functions. So you can use this API, for example, like is number. Then we can pass in a number, and it's just going to return a boolean if it's true or false. And how beautiful is this, friends? So we can, for example, say number. So this is going to be the first function. It's going to take in a value. It's going to be of type any, and then we can do the same thing. Type of value equals number. And now we can just copy this over. So now we can do the same thing for the boolean. And we can say type of value equals boolean. Let's do one for the text. So this one is a bit different. We have to see if type of value is string. And we also make sure that it's not a color, because a color is also a string, right? So we can say a string, and the value doesn't start with a hash sign. So you can say value starts with hash sign. Great, that's how we know that this is text. So let's also look at the color. So this is the opposite. If a value is string and the value starts with a hash sign. Awesome. And then the last one, range, is going to be really simple. So again, this is going to be value any because you can pass anything. Then we can say type of value equals object. And that's basically it. And if you have other objects, then maybe you can say in, and then you can also probably do something like value banana in value. So you can be like, okay, does this object have step, for example, in this object? Then that's probably a range, right? Okay, then this is a range. And this is how you can extend this if you're going to add more things. But just for now, this is the only type of object we have. Alright friends, so let's take care of the other inputs. So we can just go here, and we also forgot that we have to use our is number. So you can say is number. How beautiful is this, friends? We just pass a value and boom, that works as expected. So if we save this, and let's see in our template here, we already have these two numbers. So here we have our inputs, which aren't styled now, so that's why they look that weird. And basically it's already working. So I'm just going to copy over is number, so we can do the same thing for our other values. And I know someone is already going to probably send a nice pull request. They're going to be like, hey, you don't have to use if for everything, dummy, just use else. And to that I'm going to say, I hate else, and I try to avoid it at all costs because this is so much nicer to read. When you look at this code, you can just see, okay, this is one block. Okay, this is unrelated. I can like so much easier parse this than having to look at a chain of else, else if, and etc. Of course, it has its time and place, but I try to avoid it as much as possible. Yeah, so we can just say is boolean. We're already passing the value. How nice is that? So this is the same, and we don't need a mouse event on a boolean, right? So we can just remove it. And for a type checkbox, it's not value, but it's checked. So we can say checked, and we can leave the rest as is. And we also need to change the type to checkbox. So let's see if we pass in bool, we can say true, and you can see it works as expected. All right, so let's continue. So let's do text next. We're just going to copy over the number. Let's go after the boolean. We can say is text. So we need to change this change event listener to input because we want this immediately to fire instead of waiting for the user to stop typing in, etc. So when you're typing in text, use on input. And again, we have already text, so we don't need a wheel. So we have on input, then we pass in the data key, then we have this value here and type text. And that's basically it. So we can save this. Let's go here. I'm going to say text. Hi. Let's see if that works. All right, awesome. So let's do range for the next one. And range is going to be a bit more complicated. So let me just copy over this number. Let's go here. And we're going to say is range, and then we can pass the value. So for the range, we're also going to say input, or maybe we can leave it on change actually. And then we also have the ability to use the wheel. So the data key is going to be the same. The value is going to be different because when we have a range like this, so we're going to have range, and this is an object, so it has the value. It has min, max 200, and we can also pass a step. So it's going to have all of these values, so we have to access the value here. Let me just go here, and then we can, instead of saying label, we can just say dot value, that's it. And let me just copy this over, so I don't have to repeat myself. Actually, let me just copy over this line. We're going to have value. We're going to have min, so we're going to say dot min. We're going to have max, say dot max, and we're also going to have a step. And that's it. You also have to change type range. All right, so now we can save this, and let's see. All right, so perfect. Now this created the range for us. And that's it. It's not really that complicated when you think about it. So the last one is going to be color, and we're almost done. And let me just copy. So it's going to be color. Is color. Remember, a color starts with a hash. And we can just change the type immediately to color. So we're listening on an input on input. We can update the controls. You don't have to make this reactive if you don't want it, just a color, but you can leave it like this, or you can just pass it the initial value you passed in. That's up to you. Data key is going to be the same, and that's basically it for the color. So now we can pass it color. We can say color. So we can see we get this nice color, and we can control it. All right, so we somehow need to update the values. So let's go in our component at the top where we created this function update controls. So inside of here, we can receive whatever we have from the event, and then we can do the appropriate logic based on the type. So we can get the target element by saying target element. So we can say e target, and because we're using TypeScript, we have to tell it, hey, this is a HTML input element, so it doesn't complain. And basically when we log this thing out, all right, so let me just refresh for good measure. So now whenever we update something, something happens. Like, so for example, here is an input. So you can get checked here and any other thing you need, right? And to make life easier, I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to destructure values. So we can destructure everything we want. So we want the value of the thing, we want the type, we want the data set. So here is where we keep our data key label. This is how we're going to get it. So we don't have to pass it here. Otherwise, this would be awkward. You would have to do something like this. We would have to get the event, and then we would have to say e and label or whatever. And this is a bit uglier, so we can just use JavaScript anyhow. Yeah, so it's not going to change anything. This is how we're going to get the key. We can say dataset checked if it's a Boolean, right? And then if it's a range, we can get step min, max. And the beauty of this, even these values are undefined, since not everything is a range, right? They're just going to be undefined and we're not going to get an error because we're never going to run this code where it's going to try to access step, min, or max unless it's a range, right? And then we can just use a switch statement. So we can say switch, and then we're going to switch based on the type. So we have range. We're going to say break. I'll just copy this over. We're going to have range, checkbox, number, and then we can just set a default for everything else. I'm going to leave range for last because it's a bit more complicated because we have two types of events. We have the change event and the wheel event, but you're going to see it's really not that bad. So if the type of event is checkbox, we can just access the store. And again, we can just use the key. So what is the key? Well, basically we can just say dataset key and access it like this, but we can create a variable so it's easier for us. So we can say key, and we can do the same thing here. We can say dataset key. Oh, it's not even complaining. I'm surprised actually. It's going to complain definitely. So let's just do it like this. But basically, let's just say, okay, this thing does exist. So don't bother me, TypeScript. Yeah, you can already see here the complaint. So you can say, okay, controls access this on the object. So what are we saying? So this is our object, right? So we want to change, for example, value text. So this is our key, right? So we're saying, okay, on the controls object, change whatever is the key right now. And in the case of checkbox, we want to pass checked instead of value because that's the value we get from the input. Then we're going to do the same thing for numbers. So we can just say controls, we can say key, and then we're going to say value. And this is fine as is, but maybe we want to cast it to a number. So you can do it like this. You can say number value, but we can use the shortcut in JavaScript. We can say plus, and this is automatically going to cast it into a number. And then by default, so if none of this applies, we can just say controls key, assign it to value. And of course, this might change depending on what you add later on, but for right now, this is really the simplest way. All right, so we're going to see even for the range, this isn't anything intimidating. So let's see. If, so now we're looking at the event type, right? Because we have two types of events. So we can either change or we can use the mouse wheel. So we can say type equals wheel. So now inside of here, we can handle the wheel case. Otherwise, if it's not the wheel, if it's just a regular input you're dragging your mouse, right? We can just say at controls, we can say key value because it's a range input, right? So we have to change the key value. Or actually, we have to access the value on the object, right? And then you can also set value. And of course, if you want to turn this into a number, just say plus value. That's it. So this is how we update a range value that's not using the mouse wheel. And if you're using the mouse wheel, let me just make space here. We can first say direction. So this is something you learn by looking up MDN or whatever. So you need to know in what direction you're scrolling with your mouse, right? So you can do that by saying E delta Y, and then there's another delta wheel or something. I don't remember. So if it's less than 0, then we can return up, or we can return down. Or you can just make this a simple boolean, that's up to you. So TypeScript is complaining here. We can just quickly typecast this. We can say E as wheel event. And now TypeScript is not going to complain. Awesome, cool. So let's just go here. I'm going to make space just so it's nice and readable. So we can say if direction up, and now we're going to say controls key, so we're accessing the key, and now we're going to say value. So remember, we also have to respect the step we pass in. So how do we do that? Well, we got it from here, step. How beautiful is this, friends? And now we can just add it, plus equal, so if it's positive, just add a step. And again, to make the step a number, otherwise you're going to run into weird issues, just say plus step. And otherwise, if the direction is not up, you can just copy over this, and we can just change this plus to minus. And basically that's it. So the last thing we have to do is actually respect the min and max, because if we just use JavaScript like this and modify the range, it can go to whatever number you want, right? And basically this is just really simple. So you can just take controls key value, so the value of the thing you're trying to change, then we can just put it here. And if it's up, we can say if it's less than max, then we can say and. So this is a syntactic error. Of course, you can use an if, but I'm just doing this so it's easier to read. So you can just wrap it inside of parentheses. And then we can do the same thing. So we can take controls key value and just make space here. But instead of max, what we want to do, we want to do opposite and for min, right? So if this is greater than min, And then we can just wrap this like this. And that's it, friends. Unless you've done this 100 times before, you're not going to solve this in 5 minutes, right? And this is also the fun part of coding. It's like solving a puzzle, right? Alright, so let's see if everything works. So I'm going to go here and we can console log the value and update interactively, but here is one of my favorite snippets. So I love this snippet. We can use pre, so inside of this pre, this is just for formatting. We can stringify the object, so it's going to reactively update. So now we just need to pass a value to JSON stringify, and I'm going to comment this part out so it doesn't distract us. Now we can go here, and let me see if I can zoom in. Maybe I can also close everything. Alright, so now let's see if things work. So let's see if we can change the value. Or say, awesome. X updates, Y updates. Let's see if we can use the scroll wheel. Awesome. So it works in the positive, it works in the negative direction. Awesome. So let's see if with Boolean update. So you can see bool true. If we update this, awesome. Let's update the text to something like hello. As you can see, it works. So you can say hi, friends. And then let's see if the range works. So you can see if we start dragging the range and it updates the value. So you can also see scroll wheel, which also updates value, but it doesn't work exactly as I expected. And that's because probably in GUI here, let's look at this. This is the fun part when you debug these things. See, where is the range? Where did we create the range? Ah, here's the range. So this has to be input. Again, I tricked myself into running into the same problem, and you always have to remind yourself of these things. So this is going to probably work as expected now. And always I just like to refresh things for good measure. So now it's going to update. Ah, you see, as you change it, it's going to update live. So there's a difference between change and input. And we can also use the scroll wheel. It respects our step, I think. So let's go. Let's check. If we use step 10, for example, this is going to be really noticeable. Again, I'm going to refresh. And we can see it works as expected. Positive, negative. And this is so much easier to use than having to drag this and etc. So let's see if our color work. So right now, color only accepts hex, but maybe homework for you, you can maybe do some logic. You can detect maybe if this is a HTML color, HSL or whatever, and then convert it to hex or whatever else you need, which shouldn't be that difficult. And maybe you'll learn how colors work, by the way. I don't know. So let's see if this works. How beautiful is this, friends? So now we can see our GUI works. And for the last part, we're going to add the styles. But before we get to styles, I want to show you another awesome thing. So for example, maybe you want to do something when a value of a store changes. And in TweakPaint, you have something like this. So you have the value and then you have on, change, and then you can run some event or etc. I don't really remember, to be honest. But in Svelte, you can just subscribe to the store yourself. So let me show you how this looks like. So instead of using this syntactic sugar, right, GUI X, we can actually use the syntax this gets converted to. So let's say, for example, that we want to notify or do something when the text changes. So how can we do that? Well, we can say GUI subscribe, and then we can also get the values of the entire store. We can probably the structure here text. So let's see, let's console log the text out, and we need to wrap this in parentheses. Awesome. So now we subscribe to the store, and now we can console log out the values. So let me see if it works. So it says, hi, we're subscribed to it. How awesome is this, friends? So if I update this, let me see, where is this text? Hi, friends. How beautiful is this, friends? So you didn't even have to write any custom logic because that's just how stores work. Alright, friends, so lastly, let's style the Svelte GUI, and we're also going to expose CSS variables. So if someone is, for example, using this library, they don't have to fight against our styles. They can just use CSS variables to update whatever they'd like. So let's just go here to the bottom. I'm just going to open a style tag and let's start writing styles. So I'm going to say GUI. Let's say position absolute. Since we want this, you can also add fancy animations like a drawer or etc. And here's the beautiful part. We can expose these options to our users. So you can say variable GUI position top, and now the user can pass this, or we can pass a default. So we can say 40 pixels. Let's copy this over. So we're going to say top right. It's going to be 40 pixels from the top and the right. Let's also do bottom and left. So I'm going to bottom, and I'm not going to pass anything because it's going to cause chaos. So just leave it like this. Unless the user wants to change these things, they can do whatever they want. So I'm going to be left, change this to left. And that's it for that. Now we can say display grid for the items, and we can give it a gap 1.5 rem. And let's just give it some padding. And if you look at it, it's starting to look like something. Let me just close developer tools. I'm going to zoom out. As you can see, it's already starting to take shape. CSS grid is really awesome. All right, so now let me just give it some color. So for the text, I'm going to say var GUI, so we can create a variable text color. And let's set a default using HSL. Like this. I'm just going to copy this over to do the same thing for the background color. So we can say BG color. And then this is going to be, this is why HSL is so awesome, because you don't have to guess these colors using hex. You can just say, okay, I can just bump this down or wrap whatever else I need. Cool. So now let's also create a border. We can say 1 pixel solid HSL 10%. This is going to be really subtle. This is what it's all about. And then I'm going to set a border radius to 8 pixel. And let's set the box shadow. 1 pixel, blur is going to be 10. HSL, so we can just do this. We can pass 0, 0, 0, and we don't need to say HSLA. We can just do this. This is a relatively newer syntax. You can say slash, and that's it. Let's save and see how this looks like. Awesome, this already looks a lot better. And now that CSS nesting is supported in every browser, we can just continue and use CSS nesting. So I'm just going to say label. So I'm going to say display grid, and this part are label and value. So this is what we're styling right now. We can say display grid template columns, and we can say repeat to 1fr. So it's going to look like this. Let's give it the gap. Say 2 rem. So now we want to adjust the items. We can say align items, center, justify items, start. And then we can say font weight for the label to be bold. So let's save this. And this already looks a lot better. So now I also want to add a padding here and a border so it looks nicer. So again, for the label itself, you just make space here, so it's obvious what you're editing. We can also nest this, and we can say ampersand, not, like this, last child. And we can say padding block n, say 1.5 rem, and then we can say border bottom 1 pixel solid HSL 10% 20. Awesome. Let's save this, and we can see this already looks a lot nicer. Alright, so let's rein in the width. So we can do that by changing the input. So the input is inside the label. So again, we're just going here. I'm going to say ampersand. Let's say input. So we want to do it for every input that's not a checkbox. So we can do this, and then we can say type checkbox. And then we can say width 80 pixels. We can set the height to 40 pixels. Text align center, just so it looks nicer. And then we want to change the cursor to pointer. Alright, so let's save this and let's look at it. How beautiful is this, friends? Alright, so now the user of your library can change the styles without any effort. So let's say that this is a library. I have my global styles here. And maybe I want to make it more beautiful. So I can go here and I can change the CSS variable, which we define, for example, let's say GUI background color. Maybe we want to make it something more beautiful, like tomato or banana yellow. So we can make it red if you want, or any other color that is. And that is how simple that is, friends. Alright, so lastly, let's uncomment this and let's use our own library. That's why we made it, right? So we can delete this. Let me just uncomment all of this. So this is what I want to use. I want to have X, so I can say here GUI X, and then we can say, so GUI Y. We can also define the radius. GUI R, we can define the fill. And let's just copy this over so I don't forget these values are. Beautiful. So we can say fill, we can name it color, fill, whatever you want, GUI color. Then we can go here and we can say GUI stroke, and we can name this, we probably want to name it something more descriptive, but yeah, this is how simple that is. Alright, so now we have all of these values. Let me just delete all of this, we're going to have X. So there's going to be 200, let's say. We're going to have Y, 200. The radius is going to be 100. So I had these values before. Let's just see. We need color. Going to be our fill. I'm just going to copy this over. That's it. Now for the stroke color. And you can see how simple this is now that you play around with something and etc. You're just learning or trying things out. And that's how simple this can be. So let's see if we have everything. Looks like it. We can save. It's going to auto format. And now we can start playing. So now you can change the X, change the Y coordinates, change the radius if we want. It's really not important. We can change this to a more beautiful color, whatever else we want. And change the width. And you can do whatever you want. And that's basically it. So we can see how much we achieved with little code. And this is even way simpler than TweakPaint or any other tool. And if you want more homework, maybe you can implement folders. So for example, what are folders if you haven't used TweakPaint? You have a lot of these values and it would be nice if you can somehow organize them so you have collapsible panels and etc., which is really easy to do and animate using Svelte. So you can look into Svelte transitions, how to do that. But how would we implement folders, right? Well, instead of passing a single store, maybe we can pass an array of stores, right? So now the only thing left to do is to loop over these stores and do the same thing. So that's how you can create folders easily. That's it, friends. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Thank you for watching and catch you in the next one. Peace!